Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have your property questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is Anthony Kyriacou, CEO and founder of Krispyhouse Property Rental Portal. Welcome to you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We'll try and be gentle first time on the programme.
Absolutely.
Okay. And joining Anthony is Charlie Syson, founder of Teddy Property Letting Agents. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Anthony, I'm going to go with you first. Is buy-to-let still a good investment for the smaller buy-to-let investor, given the anticipated legislation and tax changes? And I guess you're in an ideal position to answer this because you run a portal with all the letting agents feeding into, so you must get a good feeling what the mood's like in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to that, the portal is trying to attract a number of private landlords. So to answer the question, I do think it still is a good investment. It's of course multifaceted because there are a lot of factors which you need to bring in to be able to answer that question. But overall, I would say yes. As we know, legislation potentially may change very, very soon.
If it ever happens.
If it ever happens, yes.
Yeah.
An ideal scenario would be to potentially throw it in the bin and then start again. But yeah, it's a big if. So I think it still is a good opportunity. It's passive income, although the market isn't the most simple industry, navigating lots of legislation which already exists and which is pending. And it also depends on loan to value lending that you can acquire as a landlord. But an interesting anecdote is a friend of mine who has, say, a mid-sized portfolio in his kind of late 60s, who told me that he was exiting the market because he doesn't have the energy, although the margins are still very good for him. He doesn't have the energy because of all of the legislation which is coming into force. So I think it is still good. It could swing in the opposite direction depending on what the next...
Certainly the government is being, shall we say, politely restrictive on the smaller landlord, the smaller portfolio owner. And I really don't get that at all, because it's this army of small landlords that have actually helped solve the housing issue.
All the renting troubles. I mean, small
now.
landlords in a way are like the bread and butter of everyone. And that is like, tenants, agents, business.
I can only assume it's about tax collection, really. It's easier to collect tax from a corporation or a incorporated body, isn't it, than perhaps hundreds of individual landlords, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe. But I would say like being a landlord is still a great investment purely because of the ability to leverage cash, and borrowing is getting more expensive, or it has been more expensive over the last year. But compared to, what else could you invest in if you've got cash? Where else can you leverage and pay off debt whilst also renting out, whilst also getting a capital gain? Yeah. It's quite a fun investment as well if you want to be a bit more hands-on.
I'm even rather sceptical about some of the motivation that's quoted, saying, we want to improve property standards for tenants and look after their interests. Great, very commendable.
Yeah.
But when you actually look at the figures, most of the complaints are coming from social housing buildings, aren't they? And, poor management of those.
Yeah, well, a lot of councils are completely crap at keeping the buildings in check. A lot of them, where we are, Wandsworth, like so many of the buildings are just like, they need painting. They need they're falling apart, they're crumbling, and it's, I think it's the councils that need to do that. But the private landlords, most of the time, are pretty good because you're faced with fines, or you're scared of your tenant not paying or whatever. So if a washing machine goes, or if you do need to, fix up the property, I think most of them do, and they do that pretty quickly. And then on top of that, you've obviously got the agents looking after. In most cases, the agent looks after the property.
Well, it's a commercial entity, isn't it? If you're a private landlord, you're getting your money for providing a service. And if you don't provide the service, you ain't going to get your money.
Yeah. And then the tenant won't even rent it anyway. If it looks like crap, you're not going to get a tenant. So.
Oh, well.
Yeah, or a reduced level.
Yeah, or a reduced rent.
Yeah, so I think I kind of agree with Charlie. It's still an advantageous position to be in. There are lots of caveats, but it's still a very, very solid asset. for sure. It just, it's the investor who's got the energy, more of an educated investor, not the accidental investor, I would say.
Just very quickly on the subject, do you think there's any merit in some kind of fairly light but nevertheless legal monitoring of landlords? I mean, it's quite a complicated business today. I mean, if you're running an HMO, it could end up being quite litigious or quite difficult if you make the wrong moves. I mean, I'm just thinking something, perhaps a compulsory days coaching with the local council about your legal obligations and that sort of thing. Do you think that would be?
I mean, it's maybe, but I think the government kind of sucks the fun out of it in a way by adding all these, ring fencing everything, all these hoops to jump through. And, at the same time, as you said, the tenant's either going to rent it or not. And if it looks like crap and if the landlord's not taking care of anything, you're not going to get a tenant. So therefore you need to fix up and look sharp and do it yourself. And having to commit a day to learn how to be a landlord, most of the landlords are working and have jobs or businesses, so they don't really have time to spend a day to do something that is quite simple, isn't it? Maintaining a property.
It should be.
We all live in a property, so we all know what we want a property to look like.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We were down at a trade show recently, and there was a company who were exhibiting there, and it was a platform about educating new homeowners and tenants on their responsibilities, because a lot of people don't actually seem to know what their responsibilities are, especially tenants. But in support of private landlords, I think the overwhelming majority act correctly, act within the law. There are, of course, some unscrupulous landlords, could be individuals or commercial entities. But overall, the industry is solid, and as Charlie says, private landlords, even small, because they kind of build up the bulk of the sector, do support.
But money industry is probably more important to them than to anybody else, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, 100%. They've got mortgages to pay. They can't mess around and.
Okay, right. Well, we'll put that one to bed. Charlie.
Yeah.
I'm considering renting out my London apartment on an overnight basis. I think we know what that means, as the rates do seem very attractive. How complicated is it to cover for and subsequently recoup any damages that occur?
That's a good question. Obviously, renting out nightly as opposed to renting out monthly or annually, you're sort of dollar cost averaging your rental asset. If you're doing long let in December, everyone knows December rents are down. So you're committing to a low rent for a whole year. So if you do rent nightly, you're obviously going to squeeze and get great rents in the summer and in Christmas time and holiday periods. But obviously, there's going to be more wear and tear. Got higher risk of someone going in, having a party and blowing it up. So, I mean, the best way to protect yourself is obviously host insurance on Airbnb. If you're renting out nightly, it's Airbnb, Vrbo, Google Vacations, that's where you're going. You just need a good host insurance policy, and you need, good protocol in place, ID, deposit if you can. It's the same as a long let. A long let tenant can also cause some damages that you need to recoup back.
But with your policy, do the letting companies or the facilitators of that service, do they arrange that for you? Or?
Well, for us personally, we provide a host insurance every single booking via us. That's a nightly booking. We have host insurance up to £4 million for every booking. So if something does go wrong, touch wood, it never does, you're in safe hands. Alternatively, if you did it yourself, obviously I would recommend you look into host insurance just to have a peaceful night's sleep.
Yeah,
I think the majority of the platforms which cater for that particular industry are all inclusive, so they do offer the necessary insurance. Although it probably would be worth purchasing additional. I would say from experience on multiple platforms that a lot of these seem to be in favour of the consumer. So it may take some time for you to recoup any of the costs of the damages. But I think the majority of the platforms do already offer that facility.
I'm just thinking, obviously letting out nightly, you've got a faster turnover or bigger churn of tenants. Therefore, each and every one could be a bit of a problem. And if you've got perhaps 3 or 4 that have gone wrong out of 12 that you've done.
Yeah, I mean, you've got that. But then on the other end of the argument, if you're getting 3 or 4 tenants in a month, you've got 3 or 4 cleaners going in a month. So you're ensuring that it's nicely kept. Whereas some longer term tenants might not report damp or mold and the issues. So it's who knows.
Okay.
It's luck of the draw.
I guess kind of from your perspective, you'd be vetting potential
Yeah,
people.
yeah, of course. I mean, you always take deposits. I mean, you can only go so far, but as long as you go so far every single time, you're getting a safe.
Yeah. So normally it's not a fully educated decision, but you feel that you're making the right decision.
Yeah. Well, it's the gamble you take for more money at the end of the day, isn't it?
Okay, gents, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break when we'll be asking Anthony and Charlie more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm joined today by Anthony Kyriacou and Charlie Syson. Welcome back, guys. Anthony, has the huge increase in overnight holiday rental properties significantly reduced the amount of private rental properties available on the London rental market?
Interesting question. I think the statistics that I last read was that it was an indication of 5% of the total market. I think it has reduced the number of properties on the market. I don't know how significant that is in the grand scheme of stock availability. I think it has done, yes. Although it is still a cyclical market, I think you find that a lot of providers who are doing it themselves find it slightly challenging and then release these properties back onto the market.
For longer term?
Yes, yeah. I think they get spooked to some extent of demanding clients who are coming over for several days.
I know Charlie's going to fight the corner, but you do read a lot of horror stories, don't you, in the press about some of these overnight things, and I can see why perhaps somebody who just wants a nice peaceful passive income might resist the proposition.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ends. I mean, obviously, you can rent it out for a year, 2 years, 3 years, lock it in, passive income, relaxed. Or if you want a bit more money, you enter that field. But obviously, there's higher risks, but it's risk, return, reward, isn't it? At the end of the day. But if you've got insurance, as we just said, you're covered.
Well, across London, I can't remember how many boroughs we've got here now, but I mean, what's the percentage that allow the overnight letting?
It's mostly the new builds that don't. A lot of new builds have a 90-day minimum. So you are in that, especially with the short lets. Most short let clients, you think they're holidays, but most of them are local domestic doing an extension or maybe an international student or corporates or whatever. Those tend to be most of the short let clients. But obviously you can't really pick from everything because, again, most buildings don't allow short lets. So it's mostly like Victorian share freehold conversion stuff that's allocated for short lets.
Okay.
It's a growing market, so it is reducing.
Is it growing?
I think it's definitely a growing market in London.
Growing, yeah.
Absolutely. I think every time the pound falls in strength, it becomes more attractive for tourists coming over, and that needs to be serviced. It does serve a fantastic purpose of bringing people to London, with the caveat that it does reduce stock, but I don't think it's creating that much of a dent at this moment in time.
I'm really struggling. I've been in property in London for, 30, 40 years, and I'm really struggling to understand where we're going with all these things at the moment. I'm all for innovation. Charlie, we've spoken before. I personally think we're ready for new types of leases and perhaps new types of landlord. I think perhaps there ought to be a landlord that is in the market and licensed to give long-term letting agreements, perhaps 12 months plus, 12 to 5 years, something like that. And then landlords who are just by circumstances restricted to giving perhaps 6-month or 12-month lets because of their financial position. They may not be able to, guarantee availability past 12 months. Their finances may be not so secure as an institution or whatever. So I get all that, but I walked down the road here this morning just to go to a meeting with a developer, and every single block on the way down here, which will include 4 or 5 by some of London's biggest developers, are all funded by Asia Pacific companies. The funding has come from them. The companies are here, they're UK companies, but that funding has come from Asia Pacific areas. And I just wonder, with all this turmoil in the rental market, because I think we've all been taught in the past it's as bad to over rent as under rent, isn't it? If you're a landlord, if you pitch your rental right, you get good tenants. If you're too much, you don't, and if you're too little, you're in trouble. But I wonder, with all this turmoil, with this government legislation, whether the overseas investors will get a little bit tired of investing in London, say it's just too complicated, it's too messy, it's too much legislation. What do you think?
I think a number of them are actually exiting the market already. I think their yields are down at present. I think it, however, is still a safe bet to park your money in London. So that still adds to the attractive value to it.
Is that for legal security?
I think yes, but also in terms of capital growth on an asset as well. After several years, you see the value
100%.
of property increase.
It's going to come right if it's even gone wrong, isn't it?
Yeah,
Usually.
Yeah, I mean, you want to enter in at a good level at the very beginning, of course, but it's still a very safe market to park your money in terms of stability within the UK market and capital growth on an asset too.
Okay, you agree with that, Charlie?
100%. There's 200, 300, 400 years of London property price history, and I don't think it's ever really gone down, has it? So I mean, at any point if you entered, your quid's in. So I would say London's always going to be a really, really safe investment, especially just for the planet. I mean, it's...
And just on a slightly different subject, I mean, we've had a trend of all these new blocks having swimming pools and gymnasiums and steam rooms and all the rest of it, which have actually, once the developer's gone away and doesn't feel like subsidising the service charge anymore, have seen 100% increases in service charges over the last 5 or 10 years. That obviously hits yields. Do you think that development going back to more basic buildings is on the cards to keep these costs down?
That's a really, really good point. I think like a lot of the developers, the big developers like that, they do it to sell the apartments for maximum. And there's some that I've seen that will even guarantee rental yields for the first year at like 5.5% or whatever, so that they sell the apartments. But then you're right, then the yields drop. And then, you probably, if you want to sell the apartment the next year or the year after, you sell it at a loss. A lot of those developments aren't great investments, I would say. And you're spot on, because the service charges then go up and the asset is worth less.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think the kind of original, the position for developers kind of creating developments of the such is to sell them at maximum level, the individual units. So probably would be advantageous if they were to not incorporate these type of facilities, perhaps, not sell them at a discount, but not distort the market so much, essentially. And if we can achieve that, then I mean, let's kind of look at this, take a step back. This foreign investment is positive. It brings more money to the country, especially to the capital, increases the housing stock, although perhaps at some rental levels that not everybody can afford. However, it does add to stock. So that's extremely positive.
And it's nice to have a sauna.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's the main point.
Yes, yeah. Having additional facilities after a long day of work is a plus.
Yeah.
But I was just looking at some figures the other day. I mean, there are 2 blocks here that one at 30% and one at 49% have devalued since their launch 10 years ago. And that's because of service charges.
Wow.
But there we are. Anyway, let's move on. Charlie.
Yeah.
If I want to let my apartment out, it may suit me to take on short-term holiday lets as I'm out of the country with my work. At least then I can get some use personally out of my property. I am, however, aware that I must let my lender know about any rental agreements I make. In terms of an assured short-hold tenancy, that would be quite straightforward. But would a notification be required every time I let the apartment for 1 or 2 days on a holiday let basis?
You would, I mean, the same as an AST. If you're flipping in and you're starting to do rentals, it doesn't matter if you're doing just a few or a lot. You'll need consent to let, obviously, from your lender, because it purely depends circumstantial how many lets you're going to do. I guess if
is a lender going to ask that question?
No, which is why you just need consent to let.
Yeah.
You need to get consent to let if you're going to.
So let's get to the practical point.
Yeah, 100% consent to let. Better safe than sorry.
Yeah. They're not likely to specify the type of lease agreement you're going to give.
No, I mean, you don't need to go into that. If you're going to rent it out, you just need consent to let. It's pretty simple.
Have you anything to add to that, Anthony?
I think the question was specifically, if I interpreted it correctly, would the lender consent, I guess, certain conditions?
Well, I think the question really is saying, look, if I do one 12-month let, fine, I know I've got to ask my lender. if I did 20 overnight lets, holiday lets, would I have to ask 20 times?
Yeah,
Right,
the
yeah.
answer is no. No, you just need one consent to let.
On a short-term basis.
Yeah, if you're going to rent it out, you need consent to let, don't you?
Okay. Yeah. So I guess it's a yes, but not on repeated occasions.
Be phoning up Santander every week.
Well, I think I mean I can see
they need a call
I can see
centre
what's
just
on
for
the
that.
person's mind here. You know, am I going to have to do it? 10 or 20 times a year? And I suppose it's like a lot of things. If you keep paying your mortgage and just keep everything on a level key, you're going to be all right.
You're going to be fine.
I guess that's where technology can come into play to kind of automate or make it a much easier scenario to cover. If a lender would require you to request multiple times, have a quicker channel to do it, and then it could, it would be.
Perhaps we should ask ChatGPT for an answer on that one. Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to say a big thank you to Anthony Kyriacou. Thank you for coming in, Anthony. Thank you to Charlie Syson. Thank you, Charlie,
thank you for
coming
having
in.
me.
Great stuff. Good answers to questions. Really good to have you here. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.